What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate. And if you didn't know, because every week there's a new listener, right? Every day there's someone discovering Living Corporate. So I'm going to just let everybody know. And then for those who've been rocking with us for a while, I'm going to remind y'all too. Living Corporate is a digital media network, and we exist to center and amplify Black and brown people at work. That's what we do, okay? We are the voice of the people. We're not really here to promote corporations or protect them or be some type of corporate reputational laundering service. Like, that's not what we do, right? When we have brands on to talk about Black and brown people at work, when we have executives, activists, elected officials, public servants, influencers, artists, etc., we have any of these types of people on, we're going to be centering and amplifying Black and brown experiences. And if that brand happens to do that work and really be authentic in that space, then we will speak to them. And you can best believe that when they come on this stage, on this platform, we're not pulling any punches, we're having real conversations. You know what I'm saying? Like, that is what Living Corporate is all about. I'm so excited about where Living Corporate is. I'm excited about this episode you're about to hear, this conversation you're about to hear. And, you know, I just want you to know that I love you. I appreciate you. Make sure that you follow Living Corporate everywhere we exist. You know what I'm saying? If you just Google Living Corporate. I ain't about to rattle off all the social media handles. You know what I mean? Like, if you just go on Google or whatever search engine you use, because that's not an ad either. Whatever you use, Ask Jeeves, Bing, Yahoo, I don't know, what, Microsoft Edge, whatever you're using, just type in Living Corporate and we're going to pop up, right? Now, look, what you're listening to is Real Talk Tuesdays. You're listening to one show that's part of a larger network, right? And so what you're gonna, if you check us out, you look at our website, living-corporate.com, you'll see that we actually have a network of shows, right? All focused on centering and amplifying Black and brown folks at work with different lenses, right? So shout out to the entire team. As our shows continue to come, you will hear about it, but make sure you plug in so you can just stay in tune. That way you don't have to try to catch up. You can just be caught up as you catching on. You know what I'm saying? Now, with that being said, I'm excited about this conversation you're about to hear. I want you to pay attention and make sure that you click the links in the show notes to learn more. I'll see you soon. Man, how you doing?
Oh, man, I am blessed and highly favored, as they say.
I love it, man. I love it. Listen, we had you on, this was a little bit ago. You were really representing Google at the time, talking about Google, talking about your journey, getting there, being there, experience. You know, I really want to unpack some of that again, and talk a little bit about just what was that like, that pivot into getting to Google. And frankly, it seemed like you were a bit, I'm not going to say a mascot, but they definitely had you in the marketing heavy.
Yeah, a little tokenization, a little tokenization.
Talk to me about what that was like, right? Because it was almost kind of like, look at the hood dude that we picked up and that works at Google now. Like, walk me through, like, what was that? What, first of all, how did, just give me from like where it started to then like okay, hey, I'm here now, and like just the process of kind of like managing any of those feelings.
Right. Yeah. The whole thing is full of complexity. I'll say that. It was the best of times, and I won't say it was the worst of times, but it was challenging for sure. I always wanted to work for Google. Ever since I'd learned about the company, my first impression of Google was that it was a Yahoo clone, with a funny name. And but as I started to use Google products and services and technology, I became very impressed by the company and their ambitions and all those things. But I never believed that I could actually get a job at Google, that I could ever be employed at this kind of company that was considered, the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the place where, once you get there, you can't do any better. And so, I threw away my application in college. I'll talk a lot about that. I was handed a application to apply for an internship at a local office that was opening up, and threw that away because I just knew that not only did Google not want to hire me as a Black man from the hood of Compton who'd been a physical and sexual abuse survivor, but I didn't believe that I would be successful and empowered, that I might have to confront some real bad realities. And I'm not all the way sure what informed those impressions. Maybe it's Black history, maybe it's, the community that I grew up in, and things that I learned about the Black tax and racism and discrimination, all those other kinds of things. But I didn't trust that I was going to get the fair shake. So when I had the opportunity to interview again 5 years after I graduated from college, I was very encouraged by the fact that Google reached out to me specifically, but then I failed the interview, and it confirmed this bias that I already had against the company and against my opportunity to get a fair chance. So I assumed that I needed to know the secret handshake, or that I needed to be part of a special club, that, being a Black in America is not enough to get me into that club. And so I didn't have the network of people to talk to. I had never met anybody who worked at a big tech company like Google or Microsoft or Amazon or MySpace or any of that stuff. And so, I just knew that at some point discrimination was going to bite me in the butt, and I was going to be dismissed. And I didn't want to confront that might be a reality. And so I didn't think I could get into Google for those reasons. And, also because of my own self-doubt and my own skills and abilities. But, then I went and actually failed the interview process, right? If I'd have known that I would get in 2 years later, I would have interpreted that failure differently. If I'd have known that Google would keep calling me back 3 times over the next 2 years, I would have interpreted that failure differently. But, looking back from that point, I knew that Google wouldn't actually they might say that they wanted to hire me, but they weren't actually going to do it. And I wasn't ready and didn't have the skills and all that stuff. And that was true at the time, but it wasn't, completely true. There was some information missing there. And so 2 years later, when I got the chance to try again, this time I was successful. And, I still remember hearing the words, "Welcome to Google." I still remember, hearing, "We'd like to extend an offer for employment to you," and how I didn't understand what that actually meant. Like, yes, it meant that I got a new job, and that I was going to now be achieving something of a life dream. But there was more complexity around it, right? Like, when I called my wife, she had tears coming down her eyes. When I called my mother-in-law, she was crying tears of joy. No one ever shed tears over me getting a new job. Why was this different? I was telling friends and coworkers, and as the news started to get out, people were genuinely excited. And as I shared the whole story, it touched people in an emotional way, and I didn't understand why that was happening. So when I finally got to Google, I began to get this sense that I had done something important. It was personally important to me, but it's important for the people around me. Now, when I got to Google, there was a lot of privilege that I had to get used to. And, studies have been done that talk about how people from underrepresented, underprivileged backgrounds, when they get into a position of privilege, there's a sort of PTSD that takes hold, a post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not the same thing as PTSD, but it's very similar in that, getting to Google was a very eye-opening, earth-shattering experience. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. People were saying good things, and I didn't believe them. I was enjoying, food and perks, but with a side of guilt. And there was a survivor's guilt from me thinking constantly about the people who I left in the hood who didn't have the opportunities that I did, some of whom were shot and killed when I was 19 years old. These are things that I always carry with me. And now I'm in an office environment and surrounded by people who haven't lived that, who haven't experienced that. And I'm expected just to sit here and enjoy this free, steak, free sandwich, to go to all these parties and stuff and just forget about all that now. I just couldn't reconcile that in my mind. And I didn't understand why I was thinking those thoughts and why I was struggling with all of that until Google released their diversity numbers in 2014. And I saw myself in the stat line of all employees at Google, only 1% were Black and in a technical role. And then all of a sudden, I began to understand that my being a Black man in tech, that's what made the difference. Not seeing the representation. Those were the things that I began to see this as like, yeah, these cultural differences and distinctions that I bring are jarring and obvious in an environment and a culture that was not made for people who look like me or who come from where I come from. And I think because of that, I realized that there's an opportunity here to refine and reshape tech culture to be more accommodating of underrepresented people. And then the second thing that I woke up to is the idea that Google actually cares about this, that there's some kind of reason or motivation that matters to them. And, I am skeptical of companies. This is a capitalist society. We want to make money. And I think in my mind, the fact that Google is making this risk really in publishing the numbers and making that public meant that there was a money opportunity somewhere that they saw. And, we've talked about how research has been done that shows that companies who are more diverse and who champion that tend to make more money. And so I began to see that this was something that was important to Google as a company and somehow impactful to the bottom line. This might be an opportunity for me to use my story and my journey in a way that would help me to differentiate myself from other people around me. And that launched this journey for me of becoming an advocate, of being a voice in the industry, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why that matters and how we accomplish it. People would come and ask me, how do we get more Anthonys? How do we get more Anthonys? And I started out, I don't know how you get more Anthonys. There wasn't any one thing. It was a series of all these things. And as I began to think through and articulate all of those steps and pieces, I started to make sense of the story and the narrative and started to build that and be more intentional about figuring that all out. And I think it has definitely worked well for me. This isn't a one-sided thing. I talked about tokenization earlier. Some of us kind of frown at the idea of being the token Black person, being the token woman, this and that and the other. I personally don't have a problem with it so long as I'm compensated properly, right? Pay me to be your token. And so long as we're not breaking any introducing, new moral quandaries or doing something unethical, I'm all good. I'm not going to lie for you. That I won't do. But I have no problem talking about how, my experience has been and how I've benefited positively from that and the different challenges that are associated with that as well. And, letting people make up their own minds.
It's interesting because I remember, I feel like, I don't know, maybe like, let's say a decade ago, right? Google was like the place to work, right? Like I was like, man, I got to work. Like Google in my mind was up there with like the Nikes and the Apples, and it was like, it's like the place to work.
Yeah.
I mean, their brand, like their brand, it's shifted and changed quite a bit. Like my impression was that it was a place again, like progressive, inclusive, hyper innovation. And I'm not saying that Google is not innovative today, but in terms of, remember that movie that came out? It was about the guys working at Google.
The internship.
That was my view of Google, though, right? It was basically like a big college campus where you kind of just happen to do a little bit of work here and there. Talk to me a little bit about like your perspective on the ways Google changed, right? Like even in terms of like its diversity, equity, inclusion, and how, there was that huge internal email that went out from that white dude who was really offended and threatened and insecure. But did you? Yeah. You were there, I believe, in a season where things were shifting and changing. Like, can you talk a little about like how you saw things maybe shift and move around?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things during my time at Google that happened, and these aren't necessarily good or bad things. They're just, I think part of the natural progression of how a company moves and grows and changes. I mean, companies go through phases and they go through stages, and they, dare I say, evolve over time, and that is necessary to continue to innovate, to continue to stay strong, et cetera, et cetera. I still think that Google's an incredibly innovative company. I think that they're still doing things that are on the cutting edge and behind the curve in a lot of respects. Two things for me that really happened. Number one is, as Google grew and grew and grew, they needed to change how they did business, in part for shareholder accountability and for those things. So, there are things in the way of like growth and market forces that just causes a company to think about things a little bit differently. Whereas in the early days, you could be more scrappy, ragtag, kind of do what you want to do so long as you're printing cash, as it were. As you get bigger and bigger, now you've got there's a lot more complexity in terms of what the company can do, what it can't do. And as you add more and more people, that growth adds additional pressure on the culture of the company. By the way, this is one of the important things that people don't think about when it comes to growing diversity and inclusiveness in an organization, is it will test the malleability of that culture, and it will change over time. Larry and Sergey said when they founded the company, I think it's in the founder's letter or something of that nature, Google's not a conventional company, and we don't intend to become one. And, the reality is that despite those intentions, you kind of got to become a conventional company at some point. It's just going to happen. It's an inevitability, I think, in many respects. And so, as you've seen Google, the business, make changes, in terms of like, now we have Alphabet, or now they have Alphabet, right? And, these subsidiaries and all these other kinds of things, and a different kind of financial discipline that is just, resulted in a company that feels a little more traditional. And that's not necessarily bad. I think that there's a good discipline to that. But the second thing too is, as Google's made all of these strides, and I think sometimes Google gets criticized for not moving fast enough, but I think that criticism largely is unfair, because this is a really hard problem. It's the moonshot that we're never going to actually accomplish as an industry in tech, right? No one even knows what the perfect level of diversity and inclusiveness actually is. It's this thing that we keep aiming for, and it sometimes feels like the needle's moving all over the place. So, Google's done a lot of work in this area and made a lot of changes and implemented programs. And I've had the pleasure of being part of many of them and experiencing the sadness of seeing some things go away. And, and it has caused the company to refine its culture more and more as a result. You mentioned the Damore memo, what was famously referred to as the Google Manifesto. One of the biggest things that I saw happen and change as a result of the manifesto is, before that manifesto came out, people would say, we want you to bring your whole self to work. Bring your whole self to work. Everybody was saying, bring your whole self to work. After that manifesto, I didn't hear that anymore. What I heard people say was, bring your best self to work. And it came from a realization like, no, there's some parts of you that you might need to leave home. We don't want you to bring that to work. And that kind of refining is important. Now, when I joined Google as a black man, I already knew I couldn't bring my whole self to work. Like, that was never on the table for me, because I've never had the pleasure of assuming that I could just be my whole self without there being consequences. So, I knew that coming in. We had, I think Google culture was defined by very simple rules in the beginning, because you had a homogeny of people who came from largely the same places and shared many of the same cultural backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when you start to bring more people in, they don't read those rules the same way. You can't use that shorthand anymore. And now you begin to struggle. And so you have to add more clarity, more rigidity, more detail. So, after the manifesto, Google came up with the 3 respects, respect the user, respect the opportunity, respect one another. And I thought that went a long way towards helping to define like what is the culture. Typically I think before then it's been defined by things like, just be googly, don't be evil. What was the other one? I think it was just those 2. Just be googly and don't be evil really is what it is. And maybe like do cool things that matter. But as you add more people into a company, into an organization, you've really got to define like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Because what I think is cool might not be what you think is cool.
Right.
Right. What you call evil isn't necessarily what I would call evil and vice versa. And so there's all of that just has to be defined and refined. And I think that it's been good to see more of that, but also just exposes how difficult it really is to think about and solve these issues.
It's interesting because like we're also like in this space where like Black folks specifically, as I've noticed, like we love the prospect of trying to get into this tech space. Like there's everyone and your mom trying to sell you, some type of package or learning course on how to get into tech.
Right.
Talk to me about why you believe that is. Like, why is it that tech is like such a hailed space? And like, why is it that like that's such a? I mean, honestly, people have built entire brands on just selling you on how to get into tech, right? Like, oh, I'm ex Google. If you take this 6-week course, $2,000, I'll show you how to get into tech. Why do you think that is?
Money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. I mean, tech has been the greatest opportunity generator of a lifetime, right? People have gone from poverty to wealth, through this pathway in the tech, and I've seen that for myself, and the bar for entry is a lot lower than say being a doctor or an attorney. I always talk about the fact that if I want to be a doctor at some point, depending upon the kind of doctor I want to be, if I want to be a surgeon, I'm going to have to deal with cadavers at some point and get a fellowship or, some kind of a program and do a ton of school. I'm not just going to be able to, from day one, start operating on a body. Right. That's just not going to work. But in tech, if I have a computer, I can build a cloud application, get started today, following a tutorial and going through all the steps and start connecting all these dots immediately. Plus there's tons of resources and information and free classes and free boot camps that I can also use. And so there's this perception that it's easy to get into tech and that, if you play your cards right, it's not terribly difficult to get into the 6-figure salary range or get equity at a company. And then perhaps that company becomes a unicorn and gets a $1 billion valuation, goes public, and now you are, wealthy overnight. So those kinds of dreams are still coming true, and I think that has made people realize that there are plenty of opportunities for them, and within tech, you can't find enough people to be engineers, project managers, product managers, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that tech companies have gotten a lot more aggressive about getting in front of people, especially underrepresented communities, to educate folks on the kinds of opportunities that exist. And it's that's one of the reasons why I'm a career coach now. That's why I try to get in front of those same folks and share my own story, because it's a lot easier for me. Not everybody can be a Kobe Bryant. A lot of people that I grew up with wanted to be athletes, famous athletes, well-paid athletes like the ones that you see on TV. Vast majority of folks who are going to try to do that aren't going to actually succeed at that level. Many people want to be rappers and music artists and this and that and the other. I don't knock that profession if that's what you choose, but it can be hard to achieve the kind of wealth and financial security that you want to achieve doing those things. unless you are closer to the elite end of the spectrum. I'm not tech, or I don't consider myself elite in tech. Maybe other people do, but I don't. I think I'm pretty average, actually, and I work pretty hard to keep up. Maybe that's the thing that distinguishes me. But I've been able to experience quite a bit of success even before I got to Google. Like, I didn't need to get to Google to feel fulfilled and accomplished in my career. I'd already been fulfilled and accomplished in my career before I got to Google. Getting to Google was really the icing on the cake that unlocked a whole new world of opportunity that I didn't necessarily need, but I was super grateful for because it's opened up other doors that has kind of unlocked bigger and even better levels. So that's the tech industry to me. And I think that while, those efforts have been largely good, there are also these challenges around how the predators are rising, right?
Let's talk about that. What would you, because there are a lot of folks out there talking about, like, look, buy my course or join my chat, or,
right.
It's not always them
Right.
trying to necessarily, get you to buy something off top. Maybe even them just, hey, follow me over here and join my whatever, my
Right.
little Slack
Right.
channel or whatever the case is, or my Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how
Right.
does one identify the predators in this space?
That's a great question. And it can be very difficult to do at times. Since the very beginning of time, people have figured out ways that they can take advantage of others and their ignorance. That's no different than what we see in tech today, where, as you pointed out earlier, someone will say, buy my course or my product and give me this much money, and I will all but guarantee you a job at, this FANG company making, this much in salary. And people just eat that up because they don't know any better. They don't know that there's a lot of work and a lot of hard things that you have to overcome in order to really be successful at this. There's a lot of pieces that have to connect in order for that to work. Not to say that it's inaccessible. It just means that it's more work than probably what you've been told. And so, there's, these companies are charging, anywhere between $300 to $3,000 for a month or 2 months of content, or even worse than that. I call it worse because it's not something that I would do. There are a contingent of people for whom this solution would be great, but income sharing agreements.
What that mean? Hold on, what that mean?
You come. Yeah, so that's you'll do a boot camp, take this course, and you don't pay up front. But when you land a job, we will take a certain percentage of your first year salary or second year of salary, and that will be our fee. And that's if you land a $90,000 job, a job with a $90,000 salary, they're taking like 5%, 15%
terrifying
of that. That's a lot of money. You might end up paying, half of a college education, maybe a full college education, but just getting a subset of the content that you would get with the 4-year degree. And so I'm not a big fan of that approach. I'm not saying that it can't work. I'm not saying that everybody that does it is bad, but I never did that. I did get a 4-year degree, right? But with that 4-year degree came a very well-rounded education from a very reputable institution in the University of California, Irvine. It was great. I enjoyed it. It was, and I learned more than just about tech. I learned about writing and science and all these things that continue to follow me to this day as a professional. So that was great, and I don't have any regrets about that. And I know that college is more expensive now than it used to be, so I want to be sensitive to that. But after my college degree, I spent $250 on interview prep materials to succeed at Google, at a Google interview. That's it. That was a whiteboard and a couple of books and maybe some mock interviews. Yeah, that's what I paid. And so for me, it's unconscionable to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on that stuff. And again, if you have a program that works really well and has figured out the formula and it's working and working for you, great. But you got to do your research. You have to do your homework. Who's teaching? Who started the course? What's their motivation? Can you see any of their other content, et cetera, et cetera? Can you talk to people who've gone through the program that have landed jobs? Oftentimes, you can go to LinkedIn and search for people by the name of a boot camp, see what roles they have. If you don't see them working at the companies that the boot camp claims they've gotten people hired for, it's either because they're not on LinkedIn or they're on LinkedIn and they're not actually landing those jobs or not being successful. So, these are the things where I feel like, you just have to be very careful and discerning, and you've got to build your network so that you can engage in discourse with people who've gone down that road and can provide you information and caveats and honesty that you might not get through the marketing materials.
It's interesting because as I think about, again, I'm thinking about like folks who are trying to get into tech, trying to get into space. Are there any magical certifications that you can get to get you a job, right? Because I think there's a misconception out there. It's like, if you just get this certification, you get that certification, you will guarantee get a job in tech. Like, what's your response to that?
So they're not on paper though. You might know a professor in a class who has connections at top FAANG companies who will recommend you. And based on their recommendation, you skip through the whole interview process. Like you have like one interview and then you're done. So, that kind of thing exists, but again, it's not documented anywhere. You just have to know the right people. So, and it's not like this is unique to tech. This is true of like any industry. If you know the right people, they can unlock opportunities that you didn't even know could exist. So that's something I'm learning more and more as I sit in this, in the position that I'm in as an entrepreneur. So, but yeah, outside of that, no. I can't tell you go get this certificate and then you're guaranteed to get a job. And as people are discovering, even getting a 4-year computer science degree or computer engineering degree or a human computer interaction degree, whatever technical degree you want, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a role in tech or that you're going to get any kind of job, because it's not so much about what you know, it's about what you do with what you know. And this is one of the things that I just harp on about with college students. And because a lot of times when I look at their resume, they've got all the courses listed and, they're graduating, in 2023 and they've got a great GPA, but they have no work experience. They don't even have projects that they've put together. They don't have a portfolio or anything in the way of a tangible asset that shows that they are putting in the work to apply their knowledge. And in tech, the way that you apply your knowledge matters a lot. It is the way that you signal that you are the right person for the job, because tech is about getting things done, not necessarily about showing off what you know. And pedigree bias is a thing, of course. I have a lot less to prove having Google on my resume, right? It is what it is. And that is justified to a degree. But even now, post Google, I'm working to make sure that I continue to establish my credibility, to keep my skills sharp, to do the things that I've always done throughout my career in the way of working hard and really doing the work. And I think that I want people to continue to judge me by the work that I've done.
I want to talk about the moment, if there was a specific moment that led you to say, you know what, my journey at Google has come to an end and I'm ready to take the next phase. Was there a moment for you? Did you go into this even as excited and thankful you were for the opportunity, knowing that, hey, this is a stepping stone because I have bigger visions, aspirations? Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah, no, it was certainly more the latter. It was a combination of things that, when put together, signaled that it might be time for an exit for me. But even before getting into Google, I realized that I probably wasn't going to retire there for two reasons. Number one, because I had I've kind of always had my eyes on becoming a minister or perhaps a pastor one day, and thought that perhaps the ministry would call me out of whatever I was doing at that time and into ministry service at in a Christian church somewhere. So I thought that, number one. But number two, part of the whole reason why I wanted to work at Google was to make my resume bulletproof. I had perceived that I had been victimized by bias or discrimination in some kind of way, even though I could never conclusively prove it. In that I would go on these job interviews where I thought things were just going great, and I had the requisite experience and all these other kinds of things, and I just wouldn't get a call back, or I would get denied, and very little explanation would be given. And I felt like bias was at play, but it's not like I could have a conversation with someone to say, hey, so were you being racist when you said no, or is there some other reasonable explanation? Companies typically don't tell you anything. And so I figured that if I could get Google on my resume, it would be really, really hard for someone to say no and not give me the fair shot under that circumstance, because of that brand recognition that you mentioned earlier. So that was part of it. And, to be honest with you, there wasn't anything that made me feel like I had to leave Google. I could have very well worked there for the rest of my life and retired and been very fulfilled and, pleased my Lord and Savior in the work that I was doing. I think for me, what happened is that I went into Google as a software engineer and became this diversity, equity, inclusion advocate, this influencer within the tech community. And I started finding myself doing things that no one else was doing, or that very few were doing. And I almost got the sense like, wow, I need more room to grow. And and this isn't something that's unusual. There are a lot of people who go to FAANG companies that, at a certain point you start to question, like, can I be great without being here? Can I go and make my own Google one day, or my own Meta, or my own Twitter? You start to think about that. And I think it just naturally, because these companies tend to hire ambitious people who tend to think big and are problem solvers. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you'll want to take that equity and go off on your own and try to figure out how to be an entrepreneur and do something that's your own thing. And, if it takes off, great. If it doesn't, come back. There's a lot of people who leave, who go from one FAANG company to the next, and then they come back to the one that they really want to retire at. So that's just a thing that happens in tech. For me, the specific space that I focused on was helping underrepresented folk understand what they needed to do to succeed at technical interviews at big tech companies, because that was a really important experience for me. Failing the interview back in 2011 and then succeeding after studying for a month and a half in 2013, my life changed in profound ways after I got that job offer. And it was in part because I succeeded through that rigorous interview process. And I learned a lot of things as I prepared for that process that, even when I failed in 2011, still changed me as an engineer. I became better after preparing for the interview and even failing. I became better as an engineer. And so I've always felt very passionately about that particular part of it. And I feel like I'm very good at helping people with that part of the tech journey, in addition to thinking about their career holistically. And so late last year, we had the Great Resignation, and a lot of people were leaving their jobs looking to come into tech. And I began to see things like the growing or the growth of social audio, and I began to connect more and more with people who were trying to transition into tech who could benefit from the wisdom, advice, and expertise that I give. And I just felt like it was a good time for me to really commit to doing that in a full-time way and really giving it a shot. You know, as an entrepreneur, when you're running something as a side hustle, a lot of it is about testing the waters, you know, putting your toes in and seeing how it feels, and you know, does this really make sense? But you're always going to be limited so long as you have that full-time job that you've got to tend to, because your attention and your loyalty is always going to be divided. And so I really wanted to give my business a fair shot, and that meant diving into the waters and really focusing my attention. And it's been a wonderful journey so far. I've enjoyed it. I've been much more successful than I think I deserve. But you know, it's been great. And I encourage anybody working in tech to really consider entrepreneurship and build, because it helps build certain, even if you keep it as a side hustle, you know, even if you're not interested in becoming a full-time entrepreneur, it gives you insight into the kind of disciplines and practices that helps you to be good in tech, or at least to be better, because so much of tech is about having an entrepreneurial mindset, about understanding what that minimum viable product is and iterating on that and improving and getting better and understanding your customers and your users. And so, you know, it just served to really enrich and fulfill me in ways that I didn't anticipate.
You know, I think it's incredible that, considering your background, that like your exit wasn't, you know, it wasn't acrimonious, right? It wasn't, and there was nothing that was, you know, necessarily particularly negative. Talk to me about your pivot and your consulting firm today, the work it's doing, you know, your vision for it, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I plus one that that sentiment around just how grateful I am that I felt like I left on the right terms. And you know, I still can't tell you that I won't end up back at Google working there, because I really enjoyed the experience and would have continued working there. And you know, if everything goes to crap in a couple of months, I know what door I'll be knocking on first. But you know, for me, when I left, there were a couple of things I really wanted to do. I wanted to expand my impact and reach when it came to underrepresented folks. So what that has looked like so far is, before this year, I worked primarily with individuals, but now I've been making my way into larger companies as an advisor, as a coach, doing this kind of work on their behalf. And so, you know, my first client post Google was Carrot, the world's largest interviewing company, and they do technical interviewing for a lot of organizations. But they started an initiative called Brilliant Black Minds that provided free mock technical interviews to specifically Black software engineers in the US. And that was exciting to me. It's like, I love technical interviewing. This is the thing that I want to coach people on. You mean there's a way for me to work with Carrot and the Brilliant Black Minds program to expand the reach of that that information that I've been putting out for years and make it freely available to them? Yeah, sign me up. Like, this is great. And so I've really enjoyed working for that program, and there's a lot of work to be done for sure. But I've been seeing people in the program, Black engineers like me, who for some share a very similar background with me, succeeding and getting job offers and growing in their interviewing skills. And I just love being able to pour into them. And I want to do more of that. And I think that, you know, before I made this full-time switch and pivot, I just wouldn't have had the time. I wouldn't have had, because I've got to, you know, working full-time, I've got to focus on my employer for most of that. And the context switching can be difficult. But now I get to wake up in the morning, and the whole day I'm thinking about, how can I develop a new workshop? How can I interact with folks? How can I ask questions? How can I, you know, practice some of these things and get inside candidates' shoes? And how can I talk to interviewers about what they need to do? And, you know, for me, there's two things that we need to, that needs to happen to really move the industry forward. One is we've got to teach underrepresented people how to play the game as it exists today. And then two, we've got to change the game And I put things in that order because it's generally easier to teach people how to play the game first and then change the game after that. So that's where my mindset is. And I've been very grateful to have conversations with a number of tech companies and non-tech companies to help just provide that knowledge and expertise and to share my own journey and story. So, a lot more public speaking nowadays, a lot more consulting. And, the other thing that was very important about making this move is I really appreciated the things that I got to do for Google, but I felt like other companies also need to be doing some of these same things. And so much of my experience had been seen through the lens of Google. But if we want to make changes as an industry, there's things that Meta has to do. There's things that that Twitter has to do. We've got to start encouraging more conversation across the industry with tech companies and non-tech companies alike. And I felt like there might be an opportunity for me to be a change agent across the industry and across different companies through the work that I do with Morgan Latimer Consulting. And that's been exciting. And I've been amazed to see the growth that my company's been able to experience, but then also just the interest from so many people who've reached out to me and let me know how needed my work is.
Anthony, I have to say that, I continue to be inspired by your work, by your voice, and by the spaces that you inhabit, man. As we think about like the future of DEI, because you talked about you really growing into being a DEI advocate at Google. Where do you see that space really going? And I ask that in the context of, right now we're in this space where, Black is no longer in vogue like it was 2 years ago, right? Like it's not the cool to support Black folks. We're seeing the idea around CRT raising and white folks really, lashing back. We're seeing, even in this moment, especially as we seeing like kind of the economy adjust and tilt and contract and whatever other words you want to use, we're seeing DEI be less of a focal point for organizations. Where do you see the future for Black folks being, let's say, but just between now and like 2030, as we look at this like enhancingly hostile political landscape, as we look at, again, like organizations merging and kind of like retracting back to like what makes really good sense for their bottom line, for their stakeholders? Where do you see the DEI space going? And then where do you see Black folks needing to pivot and focus in this corporate context?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think I'll start with explaining why I named my company Morgan Latimer Consulting, and that will help me to pivot into the answers for these questions. So I named my company Morgan Latimer Consulting in honor of two of my favorite Black inventors, Garrett A. Morgan and Lewis H. Latimer. Garrett A. Morgan invented the precursor to the modern traffic light, gas mask apparatus that firemen use to save lives. And I think was a kind of hair grease. So he actually developed and invented a line of hair care products for Black folks. Lewis H. Latimer invented a better filament for Edison's light bulb and drafted all of his diagrams and drawings for the patents that Edison would eventually get. So, these men were innovators during a time of slavery, of Jim Crow, of the mass lynching of Black people. That was the context in which they contributed these massively important innovations to society. And there's others, of course. George Washington Carver is another one of my favorites. Frederick McKinley Jones, et cetera, et cetera. So these innovators, I'm following in their legacy, right? I'm not doing something fundamentally new. The context is different because we've got tech, but really for me, I want to continue the legacy that my ancestors set before me of doing what they could to blaze new trails for the folks who'd be coming after them. And so that's what motivates me. And I think that in the way that Black folks have always done this in America, we'll continue to do that. And it's very important that Black folks specifically own this part of the journey, as we are moving in tech and doing what we do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I actually disagree with the notion that Black isn't in vogue as it was 2 years ago. I think it very much is so. And I think, but it's been slow to see how that's all working. So the Blacks in Technology organization just did a study with the Plug, and it was recently announced as it's called the State of the Pledge. So I encourage folks who are listening to this podcast to go check out the State of the Pledge. And so there were billions of dollars in the wake of the George Floyd murder and some of the other things that happened with the protests and uprisings. There was this big response of tech companies pouring billions of dollars into initiatives and efforts specifically to make the lives of Black folks in tech better. And that money's still being spent. Programs are still being developed. Campuses are still being built. And I think even in the middle of the current financial climate, there's still a great interest among companies to hire and retain underrepresented folk. Not just Black folks, but other because as an industry, I think companies realize that they can't afford to slow down. It's already been a tough and slow process to raise the numbers as it is, and I think to slow down would put the industry back significantly. So I think that there is still, case in point, brilliant Black minds. I'm working on a program specifically dedicated to reaching Black folks with technical interview advice that in preparation tools that you'd have to pay hundreds of dollars for anywhere else. So, Serena Williams' investment in Brilliant Black Minds as a program and some of the other investments that have been made, it speaks to me that Black is very much in vogue these days. And I don't know whether that will grow, but at least for now, there is a sustained push and sustained interest. Where is this going? I think that Black folks in tech, especially as more and more of us experience the privilege and wealth that comes with being in this industry, we are starting to own more and more of our own direction and trying to build the platforms and tools and pathways that will ensure future success. There are now VC firms that have been started by Black employees of tech companies, looking to pour some of that wealth that has been earned through, equity from, these large tech companies into the next wave of Black innovators, specifically and underrepresented innovators, and I think that a lot of that investment is going to bear fruit in the decade to come, and maybe even sooner than that. So, so much of this is thinking about the long game, and again, I want to emphasize that this isn't a new journey for us. Black folks have been on this journey for a long time. And I think that the way that you think about this journey, and I always butcher this part of it because there were 2 or 3, intellectuals and notable Black folks who had arguments about how Black folks should engage with society, and specifically with American society. So you had Marcus Garvey, you had Booker T. Washington, and a third individual. This is the part where I always trip up, but you had these folks who were debating in academic circles and non-academic circles, like how should Black folk. Marcus Garvey is like, we should just all go to Africa. Like we should just get out of the U.S. and go to Africa. Booker T was of the opinion that no, what we need to do is educate ourselves. We need to play the game, and then that will win us the respect that will help us to change things later on. I think I'm probably more of the Booker T influence, to be honest with you. And then we had a third individual who was saying, yeah, I mean, we'll kind of play the game, but we will demand respect right now. We will work hard and we will achieve equality by any means necessary. And to this day, that argument, that discussion, that debate is still playing out in our country, in Black America. And I won't say that any particular strategy is right or wrong. It's simply to acknowledge that each of us will make a choice. And to bring that to more reality, when you come into tech as a Black person, I think the only thing you can't do is rest on your laurels. I don't think you can just sit there and be mediocre or average. I think you either have to be exceptional in your work or you have to be steadfastly committed to helping bring other folks to the table and make room for them. And I think it has to be at least one of those two things. And that can be tough for some folks because when you look at other people who maybe are well represented, they can afford to just come to work, do their job, leave and go home, and focus on their lives. But I've never felt like I could all the way do that in tech. I always felt like I had a responsibility to help other underrepresented folks while I was in the job, even if that meant sacrificing my own career progression, or it meant really making sure that I stand out because I sensed that there was increased scrutiny on me as one of the very few Black people at the company in my office. So, these are the kinds of choices that we still have to make. I look forward to a day when there's nothing especially notable about a Black person being hired at a place like Google. When it happened for me, it was incredibly notable. I mean, I got a BuzzFeed video, for crying out loud.
You did? It was fire too.
Right? I mean, and at the end of the day, I'm just like, I just got a job. Like, that's really what I did. I got a job. It just turns out that I was a Black man in America who suffered a lot of things, who got a job at the company that most folks in tech would love to work for, would kill to work for. And, there's that the context of American racism and discrimination and just the legacy of all of that is what makes my journey so notable. But I do look forward to a time when, a Black person, they do the things that anybody else does, and they get the job like anybody else would based upon the merits of their work and accomplishments. And they don't feel like they have to have any additional pressure. It's just the job. So one day that will come, and perhaps during my lifetime.
I love it. Anthony, look, man, we could go for another hour or two. I'm convinced. I want to respect your time, brother. Thank you so much for being on Living Corporate. I'm glad we're able to make the time. This is your second time on the show. We definitely consider you a friend of the show. We'll make sure to put all your information in the show notes. So make sure y'all listen to this, pause, click the links in the show notes, learn more about Mr. Mays, all the work, incredible work that he's doing, organizations that he's leading. And Anthony, look, man, you got to come back. You got to come back. And let's not make it be like two years like last time. You come back next year.
That's right. Anytime. I mean, I tell you, I've done some podcasts throughout my career, but coming and speaking with you, Zach, and being with Living Corporate, there's nothing like it. So I'm definitely subscribing. I definitely appreciate it. And hey, if you are a Black engineer in the U.S. Looking to level up your technical interviewing skills, check the link in the video description or in the audio description, because I want you to sign up for Brilliant Black Minds and come join me as we help you level up.
You heard him, and I'm all for it. Anthony, we'll talk to you soon, brother. God bless you, man.
All right, God bless. Peace.
Peace. And we're back. Yo, I want to thank our guests. I want to say much love to the entire Living Corporate team. Thank you for you. That's right. You listen to this right now, driving your car or on the subway or, working out or just listening late at night while doing some work or something. Thank you for being a part of our Living Corporate community. I appreciate you. Make sure, if you haven't already, that you create a login on living-corporate.com where you can actually get all this content pushed to you based on the types of things that you want to engage and listen to. Till next time, this has been Zach. I'll catch you soon. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.